The next garment I will be making is this 1886 overskirt. I made it once before out of some blue plaid fabric. I'll put a picture of that on screen. And I made a blog post about it. So if you're more interested in a more in-depth explanation of how this is made, and then I will link that in the description box. I have this lovely linen check from Burley and Trowbridge. Here, it's very pretty. And this is the front panel here, and that is the side panel. So the first step is to attach these things together. And what I did also is that you'll notice here in the illustration that it's pointed in the front. What I did is I rounded it out, and I also shortened it a little bit. So it'll probably be about here because I'm doing some detail on the underskirt that I want to be seen more. And so basically I just shortened the overskirt around that length. After these pieces are sewn together, then this all gets pleated down very densely. Here is the overskirt, hemmed and pleated. Pleats are looking super nice. What I'm going to do though is, I did this on my last overskirt. Basically the section that's pinned right now, I'm going to tack it down by hand, tack the pleats down. And so because if I don't, then they'll just be secured here and they won't form as nicely over on the rest of the overskirt. And so I'm just going to tack that down by hand. And then here, obviously I'm going to sew this in place, and then I'm going to bind it with either some ribbon or some self fabric. I'll see if I have enough scraps to do that with. It's looking super sharp. And the cute pleats are here as well. And then here's the back panel. This opening right here is the center back opening. Right here I had to clip it because I sewed it by machine, so I had to clip it to get it to turn over properly. And so I'm going to use scrap and reinforce that edge so it doesn't fray. This part that isn't hemmed is actually what is pleated to the back of the waistband. And then the rest of this, that's the center back, the bottom there. The rest of this is actually the hem of the skirt. And so I'm going to do the pleats on the overskirt there, and then I will get the back settled. Hello, there are some gardeners outside, so hopefully it isn't too loud right now. And what I have an update on the overskirt is that it's pleated to the waistband right here. And then the next step is to sew it to the waistband and then add some more finishing touches like hook and eyes, and the overskirt will be done. Here is the 1886 overskirt all done. It has the pleats that are tacked down here, and the back just hangs nicely over that. The pleats will go towards the center. This is how it looks from the center back here. It has two hook and eye closures there. And underneath, it has the fronts here with the pleating. There's two ties there, and so you tie it there at the center back, and so they don't droop down out of place. And I think the bustle overskirt looks super cute. I have deviated from the world of vintage and entered into the world of Victorian sewing for my next project, which is an 1885 underskirt. I drafted it from this Frances Grimble book, Bustle Fashions. And what just fell out of this book was the rulers that you use to draft the patterns with. The skirt consists of 8 pieces. I have made this skirt in a blog post before, so if you're interested in more detailed making of, then that will be linked below. It has a front piece here cut on the fold with 2 darts. It has 2 side pieces with 2 darts. The darts go down very low in this pattern. I don't know if I drafted them incorrectly, but they worked in the other skirt, so I'm going to keep that. And then I also, here's the back panels. The back panels are just 2 rectangles that are 22 inches wide and then 46 inches long. And they have a little bit, you can kind of see it, a little bit of a curve shaping, a little bit longer at the center back seam, just to fit over the bustle. And then I sewed the darts in, and I also sewed the placket here. I interfaced it with band roll, which is a stiff interfacing for waistbands, and then I just did a little bit of hand sewing here to secure the other part of the placket in place there. And I also have the 2 pocket pieces and then the waistband, which is already interfaced. And so the next step here is to attach the sides and fronts together. And on the right hand side is where I'm going to attach the pocket. And then I will do up the back and the side seams. And then after I seam all the skirt together, then I will pleat the skirt to the waistband. The good news is that I finished my 1880s underskirt. The bad news is, though, that I have to order more trim because I thought I did measure the skirt. I made this pattern before, and I measured the hem of the skirt, my other skirt, and then I ordered twice the amount of yardage because originally I was just going to do 1 band of detail and then like a bind the hem, but then I wanted to do maybe 2 bands, and so I ordered the same amount of yardage, and I just barely had enough to do the 2 bands and bind the hem, so I need to order more to trim the bodice. But here is the detail. It's a little puckery now that it's in the direct sunlight here as the sun's setting on us, but that's just because, like, as I was sewing on the wool braid was being stretched, and so was the wool of the actual skirt. So I think a lot of these puckerings here will come out with an iron, and also they don't frankly bother me that horribly much because it's just like when the sun shines on them in particular angles is when they're more prevalent. So, but here's how the skirt looks. I'm just sitting on the floor here to show you the hem detail, but I've also shortened the skirt a little more than the previous time I made this skirt. So it's a little more off the floor and it won't drag and get dirty. The pleats in the back panel I think look super nice. And then I have my placket here and they just sit really nicely. And I got hook and eye closure. I am happy with this skirt, how the skirt came out, and another garment off the list. My next project is a Regency purple petticoat. I am making this petticoat out of this lovely polished cotton. Not sure if you can see the sheen in the sunlight here. This polished cotton from Renaissance Fabrics. And I am using the Folkwear Empire dress pattern. I've used it for all my Regency dresses. I really like it. And right here on the fold is the front panel. However, I don't have enough fabric. This is 56 inches, by the way. I don't have enough fabric to cut the side panel as well. So what I'm going to do is that the side panel adds 15 inches at the hem of width and 2 inches at the top. And so what I did is I just added it on to the back panel here, that amount. So I added 2 inches at the top. I wasn't able to fit 15 inches in. I was only able to fit 12 inches in. But this is a petticoat, not the full dress, and so I think that's okay. Adding that the petticoat will be narrower than the dress on top. So I just got the most of the yardage that I could, and this right here at the end, I got 2 yards, by the way. Maybe if I wanted to make like a proper full, like essentially an underdress, I maybe should have gotten 3. But this fabric right here will be more than enough for the bodice part, which I am going to use a different pattern, the 1790s petticoat pattern from American Duchess, which I used for my petticoat before. But what I'm also going to do is I'm going to cut this out with pinking shears because I just don't want to change the threads in my machine to a lighter color to match the light color of this fabric. So I'm just going to use pinking shears. Here is a Regency petticoat update. I have sewn together the skirt and I have hemmed it by machine here. I know it's a little lumpy, but that's what irons are for. And I also have a 3/4 inch tuck right on top of the hem there. The reason being is that I don't want the petticoat to show under my dress, to peek out from underneath my dress, I should say. And so I just shortened it by 1.5 inches there. And so these are the back panels, and let me pull down the dress to show you the bodice. And so the bodice is all sewn together here, and the back of the skirt is pleated to match the length of the back bodice. It just has 2 knife pleats folded towards the center back of the skirt. I have my back pieces here. I have my side pieces here. And as you see, I also sewed the arm size by machine as well to finish that off. And also what I did is I shortened the back neckline by a lot because the entire bodice of this pattern is meant to be gathered across the neckline and the underbust, and mine isn't going to be gathered. And so there was fabric basically all in here, and that when I tried to move my shoulders all crunched up, and I couldn't get the front panel low enough where it was supposed to underneath the bust. And so once I cut all this away here, it was much easier for me to do that. And so also I won't see this. This will be turned under 1/2 inch, and so therefore I will not see the top of this petticoat through my dress. And I attach the front panel, which also has the strap cut in one there. I attach that to the front of the skirt here. There's going to be a little bit of overlap there at the center front. This is the center front of the skirt. I cut about a 3-inch slit into the skirt there. And once I sew the neckline by machine, I'm going to fold this under, finish that edge by hand, and then sew on 3 or so hook and eyes. And then the petticoat will be completed. Here is my petticoat, all done here. I have sewn the neckline and sewn on the hooks and eyes here. There you go, that's the front closure here. And here it is from a side view, and then here is a close-up of the hook and eye closures. Well, not actually hook and eye, hook and thread bar. And I think this came out well, and just what I needed to put under my Regency dresses, including the one that I intend to make specifically for this trip. My next project, keeping with the Regency theme, will be a Regency bonnet. I've already used this pattern to make those 2 bonnets, the green one and the pink one there. And this is the Liliac Bonnet pattern from Timely Tresses. And it is an open crown bonnet. So this is this piece, the brim piece, is the only buckram piece, and everything else is soft. So there is no firm structure in the crown piece. And so I cut out the brim from buckram, and I wired it with 18-gauge millinery wire, and then I stitched that by hand with whip stitches, and then covered it with bias cut strips of cotton flannel. And then here is the crown shape. There is a large circle of my fabric, which is a silk-like ? This came from my college costume shop, so I don't know the fiber content, but it looks very pretty. It's a lilac color. And then I don't believe the pattern said to do this, but I did this for my other 2 bonnets, and I liked it. I cut a interlayer of tarlatan to give it some body, and then some lining so the tarlatan doesn't get caught in my hair when I put the bonnet on. And you will see that the inner layer, the lining, and the tarlatan layer are about, I would say, 1 inch narrower in circumference than the outer piece. That's by design. That's what the pattern called for. So not only does the outer brim get gathered down to the outer crown gets gathered down to the inner crown, then the whole thing gets gathered down to your head circumference. And in addition to cutting out the crown, I also cut out some coverings for the brim piece, and I just stitched by machine on the outer edge of this crescent, and then I flipped it in and ironed it, and then the brim piece will go inside there, and I'll do some more work at that piece. If you're interested in a more step-by-step instructional for this bonnet, I actually have a blog post about making that bonnet on my website. I have assembled each of the pieces of this bonnet separately, and then now all that's left to do is attach it. First, I gotta move this chair that's in my way, and then I'm just letting you know it is sunset, so I'm trying to stand and block the sunlight from coming in and overexposing everything. So the first thing is the crown, the soft crown of this bonnet, and I have gathered it down to the measurement on the pattern, and I have also indicated before I gathered it the four corners, the front, back, sides of the crown. This is a little decoration piece that I cut from my extra fabric. It was 45 inches wide, and it gathered down to basically half the size. So it gathered down to half the size of its original length, and it is just enough to go alongside the interior brim, just like on that green hat over there. And speaking of brim, I have, as you see, turned the edge of the upper brim over and whip stitched that down to the interior. Then the crown is going to be sewn like that, and then the crown is going to fold into the brim, and then this brim lining piece is going to fold over to cover that. And to cover the back part that is not covered by the brim is this little 2 inches of strip there. And then here are the ties. The directions, at least the directions that I printed out, didn't tell me how long to make the ties, but I believe I made them, let's see here. I made them 22 inches, so I think those are a little too long, but we'll see. I can always cut them down. And these ties are made from 3-inch strips that I sewed with a 1/4 inch seam allowance and turned right side over. And the trim is made from 6-inch wide strip, 45 inches long, that I sewed with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then I folded it in half from there and whip stitched that down here. So the next part to do is attach all this stuff together, which I'll hopefully get done before the sun sets. I have finished my Regency bonnet. Here it is hanging on the wall. I sewed on some paper, I believe lilac flowers here, and I have that ruffled silk band that I made earlier, and then everything is all sewn together. And my next project is an 1880s hat made from this pattern from Prior Tire's Victorian Dressmaker Companion book. And I have cut out the brim piece, wired the edge of it, and also wired one wire here in the interior, covered those 2 wires with cotton mulling, and then clipped the edges here. And I have also covered the crown and tip. This is the front, that's the back, these are the sides. And so it sits on the head like so. And I wired the inside here of the crown. And so if you're wiring a tall crown, you want the wires to be on the inside so they don't create bumps on the outside. I also wired the top and bottom, covered that with cotton mulling, and then wired the tip piece here, and then that was clipped just like the brim, put over the crown piece, and then covered with cotton mulling. And so tomorrow what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually cover these pieces and attach them together. Here is my covered 1880s tall hat. Here it is from the side. And it is very tall, as you see. I did double check the measurements on the pattern, and this is only 5 inches, this length here, so. But it's very interesting. And I did try it on just a little bit ago with my bustle, like in all my skirts on, and it looks much more proportional once you have like the big skirts and everything, so. The next step is to add the trimmings, and I have some dyed goose feathers that are the color of this silk or a little lighter, maybe about this color right here. And then I also have some vintage velvet hydrangeas to add as well. So I'm going to get to trimming. My hat is now trimmed. I used the velvet hydrangeas like I said before and the goose feathers, but also in the back of my hat here, I'm trying to turn, there you go. In the back of my hat here, I also have this teal colored poppy to accentuate the back of that. Please forgive my hair, it is very loosely pinned up there. And here is the hat. It's almost finished, and I just need to line the inside of it. And I think it turned out super well. And I think adding the trim to the hat helped diffuse the fact that it is so tall. It was so tall just with the solid, like, silk covering. It was a little weird, but adding the florals and trimmings kind of grounded it, I think. So, I think it's super cute. Here is the interior of the hat all lined. And I chose white silk because I only had a little bit left of this aqua silk, and I wanted to try to make like a little half bonnet like the 1880s liked to have, in addition to this tall hat. But it is sewn with whip stitches around to the interior of the brim, if my camera will focus on them. Let's see. Nope, not focusing. But it is trying to focus on these little loops of yarn here. They're the color of my hair, and I put them at the sides of the bonnet so I can loop bobby pins through it, and then the bobby pin will just go through to my hair, and it'll help the hat to stay on my head. Another garment checked off the list. My next project is a bodice to go along with my 1885 ensemble. I'm using the same bodice pattern I used for my early 1890s bodice, just I am lengthening it by ½ inch. And so here is the front panels, the front, the vest front there, the front piece with the dart and the side piece, and then the backs have back piece with the pleat, and then the side back. And I have seamed all these up independently of each other, the front piece here, and then the back piece there, and then the other front piece here, because I am going to hem the front and back pieces individually of each other, independently of each other, theater style, and I'm going to put my trim on to the bottom of the bodice and then sew it up with the side seam. The side seam actually has an 1-inch wide seam allowance. That's just so it makes any alterations that I need to make to the bodice in the future easier. Here is a bodice update. I have trimmed the front of the bodice, the back of the bodice, which I'll show you in a minute, made up the sleeves and the collar as well. So here is the trim placement on the front of the bodice. I put the wool braid, the same wool braid on the skirt, over the seam point between the front and the front vest. I didn't cut the front vest at a contrasting fabric like I did for the previous bodice I made of this pattern, because I wanted to wear this bodice with the underskirt alone, and so I didn't want to put the plaid fabric here so it wouldn't match the underskirt if it was the plaid fabric there. So I made it the plain fabric, but I added the trim here to still make it interesting. I also hemmed the bodice as well, and then put trim 3/4 of an inch away from the hemline. And then this is the back of the bodice, which I also put trim there, and I also covered, this is the little tail pleat portion, I covered that with a piece of the top wool fabric. In case this flips up, you won't see the black lining. I still have to sew the side seams. I'm going to do that after all this collar work is done. So the collar, I just had enough of the trim left to put it on the collar, and I think that adds some nice interesting elements to the bodice, and so I have to sew that on by hand. The collar has been interfaced. And then on to the sleeves here. The sleeves are made of an upper sleeve and a lower sleeve, and they have been hemmed by hand. There's a band of the wool braid, and then that is 3/4 of an inch away from the hem. Then 1/2 inch up from there, there's going to be another band. And they also have a little slit in here as well. That slit will be after the braid's sewn on. The slit will be turned in and hand stitched, and then there's going to be a hook and eye at the cuff of the sleeve. And then the sleeve heads will be gathered to fit the arm side here. So the next thing to do is do all the collar work and also the buttons as well. I ironed under the front panel here, and I am going to baste that in place. I'm going to baste the side seams, and then I'm going to try everything on, make sure that it fits. It should. I made this bodice last time in May, and it's August now, so it should fit. But just in case it doesn't, and then I'll be sewing buttons, which will be covered buttons, the same fabric as this wool. I have assembled the bodice. I have sewn the shoulder seams. I have also done the collar as well here. And I have also sewn the side seams with that 1 inch allowance. And in addition to all that, I have boned almost every seam. I didn't bone the front seam or the dart, but I boned the side front seam, the side seam, side back, and back. And I just cut 1.5 inch wide channels from excess fabric. I serged along one edge, and then these I hand stitched, but then I thought that was taking too much time, so I machine stitched it. And the stitching just doesn't show. And the stitching doesn't show to the other side because I just stitched through the seam allowance there. So, and then the tops were hand sewn in place. And this is how it looks from the right side here. All the seams are nice and pressed open and laying relatively smooth. The final steps are to do the buttons, which I have right here, covered buttons, and then to attach the sleeves, which the sleeves I have sewn a hook and eye to close at the wrist. Sorry, a hook and eye. The 1885 bodice is sewn. It's not buttoned up properly on the dress form because the dress form's a little too big for the bodice. And I have the cover buttons put on, I have the buttonholes sewn, and as well as the sleeves are all sewn, gathered a little bit, very slightly at the sleeve head. Also, there is a hook and thread bar at the collar. This is the one I actually use on myself. The dress form neck's just a little too big. The sleeves look nice, and so does everything else. Here's the back view of the bodice. And again, the bodice is a little too small for the dress form with all the skirts on it, but it will lay a little nicer on me. And then let me back up so you can see it with the entirety, at least try to see it with the entirety of all the skirts I made earlier in this video as well. It's the skirts and the bodice. I think it looks super cute. Another garment completed. My next project is this Regency Reticule. And I'm using the pattern from the American Duchess guide for this reticule. And I have cut it out of fabric that I used to make my Regency bonnet up there. And I just added some seam allowance to the pattern and make it big enough to fit my phone in here. And what I did is I created little tassels like it has in the book at the 4 corners here. And so what I did is that I cut 2 strands of embroidery floss, 18 inches wide. I cut the embroidery floss the color of my reticule and the color of the flowers on my bonnet. And so it's a nice variegated color combination there. And I folded this length of 18-inch embroidery floss multiple times until it was about 3 inches long. And then I cut another strand of embroidery floss and I tied it on to the top of the little bundle of floss, and then I used an awl here to punch into the corner, and then I carried the little tassel through, and then I tied it off inside, and I put the little head of the bundle of threads, hid it inside, and then stitched right there on the stitch line on the inside of the reticule. And then I cut the threads at the bottom to make them all nice and even, and that's how it looks from the top. See, I have to cut this little stray thread there, but I think they look really cute. I have one last tassel to go, and then I am going to create a eyelet here on either side of the reticule, and then I'm going to use my scraps of fabric to make a little drawstring, and then I'm going to tie it through, turn this over and hand sew that, put the drawstring through the eyelets, and then my reticule will be done. It's a quick little simple project. This hasn't taken me even half an hour to get to this step here. So, little simple project to finish up the accessories for my Regency dress. Here is my finished reticule. My entire phone is actually in there right now. So, I got the size well. And it has the cute little tassels there that are a little crazy right now because I just turned it inside out. But I just have these 2 little bands of the satin fabric, and then they're just in the drawstring and then gathers it up. I think it's really cute, good size, and another garment checked off the list. This is a finished Regency reticule that I made from quite literal scraps that were this pea pod shape here, and there was 3 of them, and so I seamed them all together into this little reticule, which does indeed fit my phone. And I actually made a proper actual tassel because I must have said tassel so many times around my phone that I got a YouTube recommended video for how to make a tassel, and that was extremely helpful and very straightforward, so I will link that above and below. This little reticule here, I just hemmed it by machine, and there's also some elastic to help close it, and then some satin ribbon here, but it looks super cute. And that is a little project I had because I decided to bring my Hamilton Spencer I made with me on the trip. And so I wanted a little reticule to match that. So that is a little quick project off the list. Continuing on the Regency kick, I am working on a Regency day dress made from this lovely embroidered cotton voile. And I have the skirt all made up here. It is from the same folklore pattern I made my petticoat from. And to the bottom, it has a machine hem as well as a ruffle that I cut from extra strips of my yardage. And this ruffle is almost double the circumference of the skirt. And so it is almost 5 3/4 yards long, and then gathered down to the bottom of the skirt there. This is just the back panel. Here you see I have my back bodice pieces cut out. I made these bodice pieces from a pattern from Janet Arnold's Patterns of Fashion 1, and I also made a dress from that same pattern up on the blog. And this dress is going to be different from that dress though. That dress is a crisscross bodice, and I want this to be a fall front or apron front dress. These are the slits that I hand finished here, and so the top, and so the front portion of the bodice there will attach to the skirt, and it will drop down, and then you pin it there, and then there'll be some ties, and then that will tie in the back at a bow there. Skirt's all done. The skirt is also done with French seams because this is a sheer fabric. And over there in that pile, I have my sleeves cut out, which are from the folkwear pattern, and then my bodice as well, which I'll have to play around with. I've never made a fall front gown like this, and so I'm playing around with what part of the front bodice, because there's this portion that attaches to the right here, the back skirt, then the rest will attach to the front skirt. And then right here, there's just like a lining fabric to hold the rest of the bodice in place while the front, apron front, flips up over it. So I got to play around with what exactly this front shape will be, but I've watched a couple videos, looked at my Janet Arnold pattern, so I think I got a firm grasp on it. I have attached all the bodice pieces together. The back and side backs, well, the side panels really, are attached, and they are felled. The seam allowances are felled down there. And I also turned under the neckline as well. The front panels are attached, and the front panels have a little dart there to help with placement over the bust. And the front panels here, you kind of see, are aligned only to kind of the princess seam line, because once this closes, the front part of the bodice will attach to the front skirt and will go over it, and I didn't want there to be any extra layers to create extra shadowing in this area. And so I am just going to close the bodice with a pin right here, 2 straight pins, and then this will go over, and then there'll be a panel, a straight rectangle panel here, which will pin there, and then there'll be ties, which I have over here, and then that loop around to the back, and then that will tie at the center back there. So the next thing that I'm going to do is the sleeves, which are cut out and ready to go. And in addition to finishing all the interior seams, I also finished the waist seam, as you see here, with a piece of twill tape, and then the front bodice panels are just turned under and hand sewed. I have finished the Regency dress. The skirt is attached to the bodice, the sleeves are on, and the apron front is completed. And so this is what the bodice looks like. And if I remove these pins here, you can see it just falls back like that. And then this is pinned underneath to keep the rest of the bodice snugly in place. And then this just pins right here on top. And the bodice has some little ties that are attached to the rest of the skirt here, and that go to the back of the bodice and then tie in a bow. And the side back seams of the bodice, I made little thread loops here, and so that way the tie will actually sit properly on top of this waist seam, because the waist seam is so high in Regency wear. The ties, if you tie something like this or a ribbon underneath your dress and in your waistline here, it naturally wants to sit lower. It doesn't want to sit so high up on your rib cage. And so these little loops are just there to make sure it sits properly in place. The sleeves are sewn on, and they are also finished on the inside with twill tape. And I also gathered the bottom of the sleeves with a little bit of elastic. I know, modern little cheating method, but I was in a time crunch, and I rather think it looked nice, the application. So this is the dress all completed. If I can step back in the corner here enough that you can see all of it. There you go. And then my reticule is still there from when I finished it a couple days ago. And this is my last Regency garment checked off the list.